Hello and welcome to the Knowing Self, Knowing Others podcast, where we discuss self-aware leadership with thinkers from around the globe. I'm your host, Nia Thomas. Join me as we talk to today's guest.
I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Paul Furey today. Following a first career as an army officer in the early 80s, Paul found himself drawn into psychology by accident. And coaching had not even emerged as a discipline by that time, and it was still really on the sports field. But it was during a brief period as a training officer in the hotel industry that Paul found himself on a training course to improve his communication skills. The course turned out to be a far cry from what he or any of his colleagues in training departments the world over had ever experienced. It was a way of learning that put experimentation before theory. It didn't have a syllabus, didn't have set outcomes or any off-the-shelf answers for anything. And it was a really unusual breed of training that Paul took with him into his own career and into research at university as a mature student. Whilst carrying out doctoral research into the coachability of empathy in the early 2000s, Paul was constantly experimenting with various ways to get people and groups to have more straightforward, honest conversation. And needless to say, not everything worked. But today, Paul and his team have refined that way of working alongside organizations and the teams within them, helping them to draw closer together across departments, professions, and interpersonal boundaries in a way that really clarifies situations, relaxes unworkable conversations, and enables people to have real conversations. But away from his desk, Paul is a keen TikToker, and that's where I first came across Paul. He keeps bees, he runs, and will indulge his passion for ice swimming whenever he can find open water. Paul, it's lovely to have you here.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm chuffed to be here.
Tell us a little bit more about this ice swimming.
Well, the ice swimming started I think I started doing it about 5 or 6 years ago. And I had seen people swimming in the Serpentine in London early one morning. And I thought, I think I'd like to give that a go. It was winter. It was December.
Oh.
And so the following, I got hold of them and I said, can I come along and, as a guest? Because it's a club. It's in fact the oldest swimming club in the United Kingdom, Serpentine Swimming Club. And so I went on the following week and I didn't know what I was doing. It was about 6:30 in the morning. It was pitch dark. And I thought, I guess you just get in. And so there's this digital changing room. And I got my swimming cozy on in my swimming hat. And I just, strode down the platform into the water. And I thought, this is all right. And for about 3 seconds. And then the sheer pain set in. And it is absolutely excruciating for the first 45 seconds. And then all of a sudden, everything changes. The pain stops. And there you are, swimming with the swans and the little ducks and so on. So that's how it started. It is the biggest legal rush you can get.
Wow. Oh, very interesting. And the other part, we've got to ask the question, TikTok. Tell us about TikTok.
That was my daughter's fault. So daughter Vianne, who is a fine artist and, like most 20-year-olds, is very adept on social media. I had started off on Instagram last year because a colleague of mine said, you should go on Instagram and, you can talk and et cetera, you'll get some followers, yada, yada, yada. Well, I went on Instagram and it was like pulling teeth. I enjoyed making them, but it was very difficult to get followers. And my daughter Vianne said, no, you need to go on TikTok. And I said, no, that's for the kids. And then she said, no, really, it's changing. So then I got a TikTok account almost immediately because I trust her. And I started making TikToks. And then I think the third one got something like 300,000, 350,000 hits within about a few days. And that was really the beginning. I sort of got the bug. And the thing that really I find interesting as a format is that it forces you, and indeed the viewers force you, to encapsulate big ideas in the shortest possible time. So getting a big thought crunched into normal language in, 75 to 90 seconds is a really interesting challenge. And as you know, I'm always walking in the streets of London or around here while I'm doing it. So you kind of speak differently when you're walking, as we all know. And it's great fun, intellectually stimulating, and it's very flattering to get people commenting, even if they're rude. I don't mind. It's great. Tension, isn't it?
It's brilliant. Well, I really enjoy your TikToks, and listeners and watchers, we will make sure that there is a link in the show notes to Paul's TikTok. So tell us, what is a real conversation?
Well, that one that's actually a really easy thing to define, and we all know when we're in one because it's effortless. But if I have to pin down a definition, it's let me use a kind of a simile. Most conversations that we have, particularly with people we don't know, are a bit like being in a play. We make assumptions about the other players, and then we behave accordingly. So we follow a script, and the script is the things that we think, the words and phrases and our, I don't know, our sort of shtick for what we think is going to be socially acceptable to the other person or the group. So that's a play. It's fake, but it works. It keeps things ticking along, and nobody gets upset because everybody knows how it's going to go. Even when it's not going well, it does it within the bounds of safety. The play is going to finish. Everybody walks away with various levels of satisfaction. A real conversation is where the people on stage will carry on talking whilst it's going well. But as soon as it stops going well, then somebody has to be able to turn around and say, oh, hang on a second. No, this isn't really working for me today. And so a real conversation is a conversation in which people read out the stage directions. They talk about what's going on in their minds, which they wouldn't normally mention within the conventions of a normal conversation.
And my colleagues, if they're listening, they will probably recognize this. I often we talk about the stuff, but we don't talk about talking about the stuff. And I think exactly it's that, isn't it?
That's exactly it. Talking about the talk. How's this going for us? Oh, and then, well, I'm jumping ahead, but if we spot somebody for whom it's not going well, then the really smart thing to do is to reach out and help them by listening.
Absolutely. Yes. And we're talking as a group today about listening and that the importance of listening. And one of our colleagues said, we are taught lots of things in school, but listening is not one of them.
Well, we're told to always listen, but we don't really understand that it's not a passive activity. So at school, in university, we are taught listening as a passive activity where you sit still and you don't move until you're told to. And that's not listening, because then we get distracted and our minds go elsewhere. So we're not actually listening most of the time.
No, it's not that active listening that we need to be able to be a part of that conversation and really get to unearth what somebody's actually trying to say.
Exactly.
But where does this interest in real conversations come from?
I think because I suppose I grew up in a family, very standard middle class family, a bit of sort of an expat gig, sent off to boarding school. In the 70s and 80s when I was growing up and then into the army, real conversations was one of the things that you did not have. Because actually, hiding how you really felt and playing the game, staying within your role, was rewarded by, well, just not getting into trouble, not getting into sticky situations. So actually, being able to break out of stuff that wasn't working well became a very attractive proposition. And that was when I met those two people whose course I went on, which turned out to be this really weird thing, somewhere between training and counseling, which turned out to be coaching later on.
Yeah, amazing. We're obviously in this podcast, we're interested in self-awareness and self-aware leadership specifically. Where does self-awareness fit into real conversations?
Okay, so basically, if you don't know you're in a play, you think it's real. But if you know that you're shooting somebody a line, if you can hear yourself and you think, this is what I always say, or this is what I always do, this is my get out of jail free card when I'm feeling nervous or on the spot, or when I'm trying to make a point. So we tend to, most of us, we learn along the way that certain habits work better than other ones, but they're not real. They're kind of coping strategies for getting through the conversation and creating some sort of advantage for ourselves.
That is very enlightening, because that a description of knowing you are in the play, that really is it. And there are various descriptors of self-awareness, and the opposite, which it's really the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is you think you are most competent when you are least self-aware. You don't have that understanding of, I don't know what I don't know. But I
Yes.
think that's it. That's that. When I'm in a play, do I know that I know?
Do I know that I'm in a play? Do I know that I'm trotting out the same stuff that I always
Yeah.
trot out? And I look at it, and for us, there's two halves, and we have this model. And for people who are watching this, I'm going to actually draw something now. So and then, but I'll describe it as I'm doing it. So what we have here is a way of, it's not a model, it's a framework. It's something that we bear in mind, and we look at self-awareness in two halves. And I've just drawn two circles on a piece of paper beside each other. And the circle at the top of the piece of paper has the words know it inside. So know it is the intellectual grasp of our database. This is the way I am. I know how I react when I'm embarrassed. I know how I react when I'm feeling confident. I know how I behave when I'm feeling defensive. I know how I behave when I get angry. And so there's the intellectual grasp, that theory, that database. The second circle on the piece of paper, at about 4 o'clock of it, is see it, has see it written in it. And see it is the, okay, so I know the theory, but can I see it whilst it's happening? Do I have that external camera that says, oh, you're doing it now. You're doing it now. So with those two halves of self-awareness, we're all set up for the third thing, which we haven't got to in this conversation yet, which is the say it. And I'll come back to that if the conversation goes that way.
Very interesting. So I have a 3-layer definition of self-awareness, which is reflection of your hard skills and your relational skills, recognition of your impact, and regulation of your behavior. There seems to be commonality.
Yeah, I think so. This is the regulation of the behavior.
Yeah.
And those two first bits that you talked about, that's our language for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's really interesting. Listeners, if you want to see that diagram in action, you can head over to YouTube, and I'll make sure that link is in the show notes too. So you do work with teams and you do work with organizations. What happens in teams where there are people who have limited self-awareness, that they don't have all of those elements of those circles that you've just drawn for us?
I think the main thing is I'm going to introduce a word which is fashionable now, but in certain circles, and that is compassion. But what does compassion actually look like when we are in a hard-nosed business, in the city, or we go to work and companies need to make money to thrive, even charities. So what does compassion look like? Well, compassion looks like when somebody is being unskillful and is ticking everybody off in the room, or is getting left out, isn't being antisocial, but they're just not clicking with the rest of us. Sometimes we can leave those conversations saying, gosh, she was a bit of a pain in the neck, isn't she? Or he's always hard work in meetings. Don't you find? The compassionate and actually the really intelligent thing to do is to say, they're not finding this easy. They're not coming into this meeting or this conversation looking to fail or to make us fail. But somehow they're not finding this easy. So we need to do more. And that more is bouncing back to listening, is to empathize with the person and to help them to explain where they are in the conversation. They may be perfectly happy, but it's unlikely that they're going to be happy without us knowing it. We know what comfortable silence looks like, and we know when somebody is silent and uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And the smart approach is to help those people with the discomfort, but not outing them, but just empathizing with them so that they recognize that it's comfortable to talk about what's going on in their minds. They're allowed to depart from the script.
There feels like an alignment with radical candor. in there somewhere. And I can't say I've read the book. The book is on my to-do list, but there feels like my understanding of that descriptor, there is something in that.
Definitely. Yes. Yes. About, it's actually calling out what we see, but with some kindness. We're not looking to embarrass people, quite the reverse. In fact, when we're having these real conversations, it's really important that people don't confuse having a real conversation with being blunt. This is not about being thuggish about it, about just blurting out whatever happens in our heart or in our minds. But this is about saying, okay, well, this is quite tricky, and I'm not feeling quite right about this, or she's not feeling quite right about this. I'm going to call it out in a way which is helpful. Because if I don't call it out, we're not going to be able to succeed fully in this conversation because there's too much going on emotionally. Can I do another diagram at this stage?
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay. So here's what I mean by that. So what goes on in this, and this is not going to come as a revelation to most people who are listening or watching, but there's always a couple of streams in a conversation. There's the top layer. I don't know if you can see the green to everybody out there.
Yeah, we can.
Top layer is the kind of the content. It's the ideas, the words, the tangibles. And down here is the feelings.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I purposefully didn't call the things up here facts because the feelings are also facts that are just a different kind of fact. Could actually argue that they are tougher and more intractable facts than the content.
True. Yeah.
Here it is. When something seems to be going wrong up here on the top line of these two parallel lines, and I'm drawing squiggles on it to sort of signify some sort of upset in the flow of the play where people are exchanging facts and insights. And of course, then there's a disagreement. Two technical people are going to say, no, I don't see it like that at all. I don't think we should pursue that strategy. I think that's wrong-headed. When something's going wrong up there, it also goes wrong down here.
Oh, okay.
I could argue, and that's the squiggles down below, I could argue that actually the reason it's gone wrong at the top on the content is because it's already gone wrong with the feelings.
Right. Okay.
So if we want to get constructively through the mess up here, we have to be prepared, and a shortcut to all this is to pause the content, pause the quote unquote facts, to listen or to stick up for ourselves, to be assertive. So to sort out the feelings.
So when we are thinking about these kind of conversations, what sort of words are we going to be using? What sort of phrases should we be thinking about? I'm just thinking about they're often emotive situations, and how do you prepare if you think that the play may go down a route that's a little bit more difficult than you're used to? What are your standard phrases so that you've got them in your toolbox ready to use if you need them?
Okay, so in a sense, it's extremely simple, but it does take practice because for many of us, what I'm about to suggest really goes against deeply ingrained habits. It goes against ways that we've been educated about how to handle feelings.
Okay.
So, and there is a very simple sort of rubric for figuring out whether we should listen more to make the conversation go better or to say something to make the conversation go better. And it's a very simple thing. So option or scenario number 1 and number 2. So on my piece of paper here, if you can't see it, scenario 1 is that relatively speaking, and this is me and this is you, 2 columns. In scenario 1, relatively speaking, I think I'm feeling better than you. I might not actually be happy, but I'm feeling less annoyed, less frustrated. I'm kind of still more in charge of myself. There's still more thinking than feeling going on. With that option in mind, well, that scenario in mind, if I want to, if I'm feeling generous, if I am in the mood to fix this conversation, and if I see you're in difficulty, I ought to, because I have a vested interest in making this conversation succeed, then what I need to do there is to empathize.
Okay.
Nia, you don't sound very happy. John, you seem puzzled. Jane, you sound really uncomfortable with what I'm suggesting. I'm reaching out to the person, making it really easy for them to be super honest. In other words, to depart from that script and get real.
So
And they
it's
say, well, actually, you don't know they're allowed to talk about in a business meeting. So I'm going to make it easy for them. I'm going to talk about the feelings first. And they can say, well, actually, yeah, you're right. Well, I'm not really annoyed. Well, maybe I was a bit annoyed.
Okay.
Gold dust. Fantastic. That's just what we want. We want somebody to really say, yeah, actually hang the script. Let's talk about the way it really is with us.
Yeah.
But sometimes in scenario 2, the boot is on the other foot. I might judge that I am coming off worse. I am being more disabled by my feelings than you are. I'm now the one who's struggling to think straight, and I'm coming out with all sorts of angry or frustrated or scripty talk, which is redolent of me playing the unhappy, annoyed, frustrated, angry role. And then I think, well, look, I can't listen right now. I'm just not in the mood. I just don't give a damn about the other person.
Yeah.
The only thing I'm capable of and what I need to do to repair myself is to actually talk about how I feel.
Oh, okay.
So I say, look, Nia, can I just stop you there? I'm actually starting to feel really uncomfortable.
Okay.
Your idea, I'm worried. If we go down that route, I think it's going to be a disaster. And so I tell the biggest truth about myself that I can, which is how I feel. The truth that is stopping me from being intellectually in the conversation. I'm just fighting you.
So if we think about ourselves stepping into a meeting, I think opening the floor to somebody else and creating that environment feels like a simpler step than being the individual who says, I'm a bit worried here. Presumably there has to be safety in that environment, or somebody has already behaved in a way where they have set the environment where they've opened the floor for you.
Yes. So here's the thing. By the time you need this stuff, if you're not feeling very brave, it's probably a bit late. No, not a bit late. It's too late.
Okay.
So if you want, if somebody who's listening to this podcast is thinking, yeah, well, I'd love my team to be able to do that, or my board, the easiest way to bring that about is to actually do some contracting before you're actually in that situation.
Okay.
The contracting is right. Okay. So in this, we're gonna start talking about, team type stuff and our tasks and, blah, 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 and what's happening with sales, etc. But before that, I'd just like to sort of draw some new lines, some ways that we can talk to each other. So, and then basically the person running the meeting kind of lays it out and says, look, if you're not happy with something that you hear, I invite you in the strongest terms possible to speak up. I actually am asking you to speak up. It doesn't matter if you're the newest here. It doesn't matter what. It doesn't matter if you think it'll be really unpopular. I'm requesting for you to speak up.
So the leadership in that room, in that meeting, wherever it might be, is very important in setting the tone, setting the ground rules, setting that environment of safety.
Exactly. It's all in the setup. As always, the preparation for the conversation and developing a tradition. And this needs to be said every time whilst we are training our group, our board, our team to have those special real conversations. So we say, look, as usual, everybody, and a couple of you are new here or you're visiting, you'll find this meeting's a bit unusual because actually we're not nasty to each other. But if we're unhappy or we have an idea or we don't like the fact that we're being interrupted all the time or whatever, we say it and we invite that and we actually celebrate it. It's a point of pride. We find that our meetings go quicker and better if we tell the truth about how the conversation is going, not just about our ideas. If we see anybody feeling left out or who hasn't spoken for a bit, we tend to pay extra attention to them because we really want to hear from people who are being quiet as well. Even if it's just to say, no, I love this, I'm just staying out of it. Yeah. So that's how we're going to do this meeting. That piece of setup then enables people to say, okay, well, I can do it. I don't have to follow a script. I'm not in a play. I'm in improv.
That really does take some thought and thoughtful leadership to prepare that. Very interesting. In your experience, when you're working with teams where things have gone pretty seriously wrong and there might be bullying or harassment or anxiety, fear, what are you finding that there are underlying causes? Are they hugely different, or are there commonalities to the conversations that people are having when they're having these real conversations?
My experience of people who are overbearing and are seen as being bullies is that they lack self-awareness. They don't recognize the damage they're doing, and they don't know how much it hurts.
I so recognize that. Yes, the recognition of impact on
Yes,
others. Yes.
yes. When we're working with people, we always start and finish at one-to-one. So when we're going to do a piece of group work, particularly a group that's not really happy in its skin, we will always spend plenty of time with each person, preparing them, or finding out what they want, finding out what they're worried about, finding out, how they fit into the group or how they think they do, and just hearing them out. And in between bits of group work, we refer back to the individual. What was that like? Was that what you were expecting? Did so-and-so do what you feared? Did you do what you were fearing you were going to do? So we're constantly working on that. Do you remember the see it and the know it and the see it business? We're constantly bringing people back to, did you know that? Did you see it happening? So we're getting them to tune up this external camera, this webcam on their shoulder. But I think for people, and I was one of these bullies. I don't know if I was a bully, but I was certainly a pain in the neck to work with. The army, it was in the army, being in the army in the early mid 80s, it was kind of par for the course. Okay. As you became more experienced as an army officer, you realized that actually you already had the power, and the more gently you used that power, the more effective you became. So when you come out of Sandhurst, you're very raw. You've got the pip on your shoulder and you think you're God. And then your platoon sergeant, if they're any good, will show you that you're really not God and you actually don't know anything. And the best thing you can do is to keep your mouth shut and to turn up on time. So, the military was a good place to learn soft power. I didn't take all the right lessons away with me. And it took me later to really find out how emotional we are, how actually fragile people are, and how much of our time, even the roughy, toughy 40, 50, 60-year-old female and male professionals, how much time and energy we waste protecting ourselves and putting on these fronts, particularly on boards. The more senior, the more front is required because there's so much to lose, so much to protect. So bullies, I know it's probably not, they probably don't know they're bullying, and they think they're doing it for the right reasons, and they're usually unhappy and worried, and they need to be fronted up to, but one-to-one, and with that back to the compassion, because bullies are typically not happy people.
Yeah, lot to think about there. You spoke about boards. Why is your work focusing on boards specifically?
Because that's where it's the biggest dog and pony show.
Oh, okay.
It is for the most part so fake, and it's not. I'm not being nasty to non-exec directors and the chairs and COSECs. The fact is, it's very much a set piece because the board meetings are minuted by law, so they're minuted. So as soon as people know they're being minuted, they watch their P's and Q's. Okay, so that's one layer of difficulty. That's one layer of difficulty that encourages people towards scripts and roles. Another layer is that you will often have on a board a shareholder, non-exec director. So the shareholder is somewhat stymied by the people sitting behind them. They have to represent a certain shareholder view. If you have shareholders with competing interests, you might have 2 or 3 shareholders on the same board, representing groups of people who want wildly different things. One shareholder group might say, no, let's get the capital out of the business as it generates it. Another shareholder group says, no, we must leave it in to grow the company, invest for the future. So you have people who are actually not being themselves because the role that they have been hired to perform they think doesn't allow them to. So that's another layer of complication. And then there is this view between execs and non-execs. So the execs, basically, they're running the joint, and they're out to, big personalities. By the time they get to typically chief exec or CTO, CIO, CFO, they're doing really well, and they've earned their spurs, and therefore they want to be left alone to run the company as they've been hired to run the company in a way which is going to maximize the output of the company and probably their bonuses as well. And often boards are seen as interference. The board is going to say no. They're the load of people who are always saying, oh, be careful. Oh, that sounds a bit risky. Oh, you don't want to do that. And so you get, that's this third layer of, we'll just tell them what they need to know.
Yes.
So it's anything but open.
Yeah.
A really smart executive team with a really smart, well-chaired board will recognize that actually the board is this bunch of people who hopefully have been carefully recruited, who have been there, done it, and got the T-shirt, who no longer are in the hot seat, but are there to lend their ear, their intellect, their gut reactions, their advice if need be. So a board can be a fabulous resource to an executive team who have the confidence to turn up and say, you know what, we'd really like to hear your view on this, or here's a plan. It's a bit half cooked, not ready yet, but we wanted to get your first take on it. So the exec team have to be self-confident, and the board have to give them a reason to feel confident about coming along and showing up as real people for real conversations. It's very much a joint effort.
There's a lot of trust in there, isn't there, in that?
Huge.
In your experience, if you have a board that is really playing the play and they then move to being more open, what does that look like? What does it feel like? What kind of light bulbs do you get around the table when you've shifted a board from where they were to where you want them to be?
Well, the side conversations turn into the main conversation. So where people might whisper the truth to somebody next to them, or in the coffee break, or in the pre-meeting, those conversations will start to come in. So somebody was saying, I was talking to Sid you're on today. Should we say, yeah, okay, let's say it. And then they'll bring that in. Right. Again, the chair has to make it feasible for non-execs to speak up, because one thing that non-execs suffer from, and that is, having got the T-shirt and everything, they're hired and they feel flattered because they've been invited onto a board and they're getting paid, whatever, blah, 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 blah. And they want to look clever and they want to help, but they're also, they have egos. Yeah. And so it needs to be made safe for the non-execs to talk about stuff which isn't in their sweet spot.
Yeah.
Just gut reaction, just from my life experience. Do you want to hear this? Yeah, okay. Rather than, I'm an accountant and I'm only going to talk to the numbers. Actually, I might only be the accountant, but you know what? Something happened in a company that I was in a couple of years ago where the wheels fell off because blah, blah, blah. Nothing to do with the numbers. It was sentiment. And it's great for people who are, you'll know when it's changed, when people start sort of quote unquote talking out of turn, but on invitation. They are straying into different lanes and everybody is listening to each other.
Yes, and I often describe it as that what happens within this closed door is a safe space. And I often say that to teams when we're in that meeting space. But what you've talked about is safety, it's trust, it's humility, it's self-awareness underpinning it. I was watching one of your TikToks and you were talking about listening, and actually listening is the 8th direction of my self-awareness compass. Why do you think that boards particularly need to think more about listening rather than postulating, maybe, as you said, it's that I've got to come with all the answers?
Yeah, that's a really good question. They need to do that to win the trust of the executive. What a board is there to do. What's a board there to do? A board there is to help the executives to de-risk the way they run the place, to keep things legal so they can act as the conscience of the executives. They make sure that the executives are acting in a way which is in tune with what shareholders and stakeholders expect. So if you're running a company that is, sailing close to the wind and they're venture capital and they're all, swashbuckling, then the board will be making sure that the executives are taking the right sorts of risks. So for a board to become more than just a bunch of people with the t-shirt, they need to get the execs, kind of train their execs to open up in a way that they hadn't expected that they would open up. And the way to do that is to pay attention to somebody without judging them, without criticizing, without editing, without laying stuff on them. So imagine you walk into a room and you start talking to me and I start saying, Nia, you're not, you sounded very sure about that bit, but you don't sound so sure about the projections. And Nia might say, well, we're as sure as we can be. Okay, well, where are we? Sort of, 60%, 50%, 80%. And so what I'm doing is I'm trying to show this lady, this exec, this CFO, that I will take whatever answer she gives me. I don't care what the answer is. I just want it to be the truth, because we can work with the truth. What we can't work with is this sort of double talk, upselling, yada, yada, yada. So listening is absolutely the critical skill for a board, because once I have listened, then she'll think, well, I think they really get us.
Right.
They really understand why I am hesitant, or why I'm going gung-ho for this, or why I'm struggling, or why I haven't done this yet. And then you are much more likely to say, well, I'm a bit stuck.
Yeah.
And we can say, do you want to hear some ideas? Shall we kick around some ideas in here? And you will probably say, well, yeah, absolutely. And bang, there, you as the CFO are getting the best possible value from the board. But the board had to listen to you and prove to you that they really understood, not just coming in with criticism and advice after your first 10 sentences.
Yeah. It feels like emotional intelligence really underpins this, because you have to know when it's right to ask those questions, and you have observed, you have to have your antennae on to be able to hear that, sense it, watch the body language, hear the words that are being used, so you know whether you're in the play or whether you're talking about those backstage notes.
Nicely put. That's exactly it. You're watching to see is somebody running their lines, or are they really there with what's really going on? Yeah. And the thing is, though, I will say this is not a skill. We all know how to do this. We can all read feelings. We can all hear them. Most of the time, we choose to ignore them or walk past them. So it's not that we're asking people to learn new skills. We're asking people to remember what it's like to be human, if that doesn't sound too corny, and say, man, how would I feel if I was sitting there? I can see how she's feeling right now. Why don't I help her with that? Why don't I say, you don't look too comfortable? Or it sounds like I went a bit far with my remarks about your numbers. I think I've offended you.
Yes. That
And
makes
bosh, there all of a sudden, that's the human, real conversation. And you say, no, don't worry, Paul. I did, didn't I? Just a bit. And you go, well, yeah, I did. I didn't really like it. Oh, okay. Wow. Now we're really in it. We've had that establishing moment, which was very nasty, very tricky, maybe very uncomfortable, but we've made the most of that discomfort. And now we're closer. Now that trust is starting to build.
And by blowing out somebody else's candle, it doesn't make yours shine brighter.
Exactly. They're lovely. Yeah. Aphorism. Yeah, absolutely.
Our working world is really changing, and employees have different expectations and different needs of employees. What skills do you think that we need to be developing for this modern workforce to have these real conversations, so we can get to this really human side of the spectrum whilst the tech is getting more techy?
Okay. So I'm going to just go back to that diagram that I drew early doors, which is, I don't think we need to learn any more skills. I do think we need to become more skillful at noticing ourselves. And we can do that every day with our families, boyfriends, girlfriends, spouses, just noticing ourselves and becoming aware of what our repertoire is. Which plays do we know? Which scripts do we use again and again? Secondly, see it. We can play. We can make a hobby of watching ourselves as we are giving that presentation, as we are running those lines.
Yeah.
And the third one is to experiment, firstly in small, inconsequential situations, and then on the bigger stuff in a board meeting or in a pay review or in a performance appraisal or in a really big presentation where we actually call out either what's happening for us because we're a bit broken by our feelings. We can't think as well as we want to. So we have to admit to how we feel. Or if we want to help someone else by doing some first aid on their feelings to help them to become more able. So all of these, it's practicing being a decent human being, being a skillful human being.
And that's the one thing that we need to do.
It's a lot there, but be more human and notice. Get good at noticing.
We need to become braver. We need to
lot. Yes, that's it. Good word.
Into our courage.
Braver.
Paul, it's been absolutely brilliant having a conversation with you. I've really thought about things and spoken about things that I haven't done before, and it'll make me think differently about certainly how I run meetings. And I hope listeners and watchers, you might think differently about how you create that safe space and doing it openly and explicitly, because I don't think we do that enough. Paul, it's been brilliant, and I will certainly continue watching you on TikTok, and I hope that listeners and watchers, they will head over there and do the same. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you for joining me on today's episode, where we aim to develop self-aware leaders around the globe to generate kinder, more respectful and creative working relationships through reflection, recognition and regulation. Head over to my website at knowingselfknowingothers.co.uk to sign up to my newsletter to keep up to date with my blog, podcast and book. Looking forward to having you on my learning journey.